I heard it through the door, not shouted, not screamed, just spoken, calm, like someone talking about the weather or what movie they wanted to watch that night. If she's deported, we can finally live in peace. My heart didn't stop. It shattered. Not in an explosive way, not like glass against concrete, but quietly, like a thread being pulled until the whole thing unraveled in silence. A slow collapse, a betrayal so intimate, so surgically deep, that it didn't feel real. I stood there in the hallway, one hand on the wall to steady myself. My legs were trembling. My breath felt trapped between my ribs. My son, my own son, had said that. My blood, my boy, the same child I once carried on my hip across deserts, through rivers, under fences. The same child I fed before myself. The same child I protected with everything I had. It wasn't ice that wanted me gone. It was him. And the worst part? He didn't say it with hatred, not with venom or rage. That might have been easier. There was no yelling, no slamming doors. Just that tone, cold, tired, like I was a burden he'd been carrying for far too long and was finally ready to put down. I didn't know how long I stood there. Minutes? Hours? Time didn't work the same after that. All I could hear was his voice echoing in my head on a loop, poisoning every memory I had of us. His first steps, his giggles in the bath. The time he cried for me when he had a fever of 104 and I held him all night, whispering prayers and Spanish lullabies into his ear. Now he wanted me gone. And somehow, that wish sounded like freedom to him. I backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound. I didn't want him to know I'd heard. I wasn't ready for him to see my face, to see the way my body was folding in on itself. How does a mother recover from something like that? How do you look your child in the eye after hearing him wish you away? I went into the kitchen, sat on the cold tile floor, and stared at the wall. Was this what I raised? Or was this what America had raised in him? When I crossed into this country, I wasn't thinking about laws or borders. I was thinking about safety, about survival, about giving my son a life that didn't smell like fear or taste like dust. I didn't dream of riches. I dreamed of school backpacks, of clean beds, of birthday candles and photos on the fridge. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was saving him. And maybe I did, in a way. Maybe I saved his body. But something in his heart, something got lost along the way. He was 9 when we came here. He used to cry at night, clinging to me like I was the only anchor he had in a new and terrifying world. And I was. I always was. But the older he got, the more he pulled away. Little things at first. Not wanting to speak Spanish at school. Laughing when I mispronounced something in English. Asking me not to come inside during parent-teacher conferences. You don't have to, he'd say. They already know who I am. And I wanted to believe that was just adolescence, just the normal push and pull. Every child wants independence. I didn't think it was rejection, but now I see it. It was already starting then. The embarrassment, the shame, the internalized disgust of who I was, of what I represented. I was the illegal, the maid, the woman with the accent, the woman who didn't go to college, who worked under the table, who didn't belong. I was the shadow he had to carry through every school hallway, every friend's house, every whispered question about where he was from and why his mom didn't show up to the events. I had become the problem he couldn't solve, the weight he couldn't carry anymore. And I think part of him believed that if I just disappeared, all his pieces would finally fall into place. My tears didn't fall right away. They didn't have space. I was too full of questions, too numb to cry. The tile beneath me felt colder than usual. Or maybe I was colder. Maybe something inside me had frozen. He didn't mean to hurt me. I know that. But isn't that what makes it worse? He didn't say it out of anger. He said it like a fact, like something that had already been decided. If she's deported, we can finally live in peace. I kept replaying it, those words, over and over, picking them apart like bones. What peace was he talking about? What had I disturbed? Was it my presence in his life, in his house? Was it my voice, my food, my culture, my fears? Was I the chaos, the shame, the unwanted reminder of where he came from? Or maybe to him, I was the reminder of what he wanted to forget, that he wasn't born here. That no matter how hard he tried to erase his past, I was always there, sweeping behind him in silence, folding his clothes, leaving a mark in the scent of the food, the music on the radio, the prayers whispered at night. He didn't want to hate me, but he needed me gone. And that's its own kind of hate. I curled up on that kitchen floor and tried to breathe. Not cry, just breathe. And I couldn't. Because how do you breathe when your child becomes the one who turns the key? They always tell us it's the government, the policies, the agents, the systems. But sometimes, it's the ones you love most. Sometimes the call is coming from inside the house. Tell me something. Have you ever felt that kind of betrayal? The one that doesn't scream, but whispers? That doesn't strike you, but lets you wither in silence? Let me know. Share your story below. Even if it's just a single sentence. Maybe just write, I've heard the quiet betrayal too. Because someone out there needs to know they're not the only one. We're not alone. Not in this pain. Not in this silence. And we'll keep going. Together. My name is Dolores Andrade. I'm 45 years old, and I live in a one-bedroom apartment in a low-income neighborhood on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia. You wouldn't notice me if you passed me in the street. I dress simply, I keep my head down, and I move through life like a shadow, always present, always working, always silent. People around here know me as the woman who sells pain d'élote at the school corner every Friday morning. Some know me as the lady who cleans houses, Mrs. Evelyns, the Bennetts, and the Coopers, to be specific. I'm the one who comes early and leaves late, who never complains, who remembers to feed the cat and water the plants when no one else does. They leave money in envelopes and thank you notes written on the back of receipts. Thanks again, Dolores. You're a lifesaver. But they don't know me. Not really. They don't know how I got here, what I left behind, what I've endured just to be allowed to scrub their bathtubs and vacuum their carpets without fear. They don't know the price I paid to stand where I do. Small, invisible, quiet. And they certainly don't know that every Friday morning, while I sell sweet cornbread and smile at strangers, my heart is breaking for a child who no longer sees me as his mother. I wasn't always this quiet. I used to laugh with my mouth wide open, to sing while I swept the kitchen, to believe in things like holidays and Sundays off. I had dreams once, simple ones, like sitting with my family at the end of the day, eating tamales made from scratch, watching the kids play barefoot under the orange glow of a Guatemalan sunset. But that was before the war, before the gangs, before I learned what fear tastes like. I was born in a tiny village in Guatemala, where the roads were made of dirt and the stars shone brighter than anything I've seen since. We had no running water, but we had peace. I remember my mother boiling beans over a wood fire, the sound of my father's machete sharpening at dusk, the scent of damp earth after the rain. We had so little, but it was ours. Then, things changed. I was only a teenager when the soldiers came. Men in uniforms with cold eyes and fingers on triggers. They didn't knock. They didn't explain. They took my older brother in the middle of the night, said he was helping rebels. We never saw him again. My mother wept for weeks, her wails haunting the house long after her tears dried. That was the beginning of the end. Violence became part of life. Like the sun rising, like the chickens clucking in the morning. Men were dragged out of their homes. Women were violated and left broken in the fields. Children disappeared between school and dinner. No one asked questions. You learned to look down, to stay quiet, to make yourself smaller and smaller until you felt like air. When I found out I was pregnant, I was barely 19. The man was older, kind at first, then cruel. He wanted no part of a child, said I was on my own, and I believed him. I ran. I didn't have a plan, just a direction, north. I thought about abortion once, just once, when I hadn't eaten in 3 days and the cramps were sharp enough to make me curl up in a church pew. But then I felt him kick, tiny, hopeful, like he was saying, "Don't give up on me yet." So I didn't. I crossed borders with swollen ankles and a belly full of fear. I rode on the tops of trains, slept under trees, hid from men who looked at me like prey. I begged for water. I walked through heat that melted the skin off my back. And every step, I whispered to the child inside me, "We're almost there, mi amor. Just a little longer." When I finally reached the border, I was 8 months pregnant. The coyote said he'd seen worse, that I could make it, that if I didn't try now, I might never get the chance again. And so I followed, through desert and darkness, through thorns and rattlesnakes, and the bones of others who didn't make it. He was born 2 weeks after we crossed, in a small apartment in El Paso, on a couch that smelled like old sweat and cigarettes. The woman who let me stay was kind. Her sister was a nurse. She helped me deliver. No hospital, no paperwork, just hot towels and whispered prayers. I named him Samuel. He had my eyes. Big, dark, full of questions. I promised him a life, not riches, not fame, just a life, safety, school, a home where he wouldn't hear gunshots at night, where he could dream bigger than beans and tortillas, where his last name wouldn't be a death sentence. We moved east because someone told me Atlanta had work. I didn't ask what kind. I just went. I strapped Samuel to my chest and took a bus that smelled like bleach and old gum. I found a room for rent with peeling paint and a leak in the bathroom ceiling. I found a woman who needed her house cleaned twice a week, then another, and like that, we began, day by day, hour by hour. I worked, I cleaned, I cooked, I sang to Samuel in Spanish. He loved when I said te amo and kissed his tiny fingers. I taught him to count with beans on the floor. I braided his hair in the mornings before school and unbraided his tears at night when he missed the family he'd never really known. I didn't sleep much, I didn't eat much, but I smiled because he was safe, he was fed, he was here, and I was his mother. I never imagined that one day he'd grow up and see me as the reason he wasn't at peace. But I'll tell you the truth, that's the thing about sacrifice. It doesn't always end in gratitude. Sometimes it ends in silence, sometimes in rejection, sometimes in a sentence whispered through a bedroom door that feels like a dagger pressed into your chest. If she's deported, we can finally live in peace. People ask why we come, why we risk our lives, why we cross borders with babies on our backs and hope in our pockets. This is why. Because the alternative is worse. Because we believe, foolishly maybe, that love and effort will be enough to earn us a place. That if we just work hard enough, smile kindly enough, stay quiet long enough, we'll be allowed to stay. But even your own child can forget. Even your own child can turn. And in that turning, everything you thought was solid, everything you believed love had built, can vanish. Have you ever felt that? That kind of vanishing? Tell me in the comments if you've ever had to start your life over from nothing. If you've ever left behind everyone and everything for the hope of a better future. Just comment. I left everything for a chance at peace. Because I need to know I'm not the only one. And someone else out there needs to hear your story too. Back in my village, we used to believe that silence kept you safe. If you didn't speak, they wouldn't notice you. If you didn't move, they wouldn't come for you. If you kept your eyes low and your mouth shut, maybe the darkness would pass you by. That's what we told ourselves. Because we had no power, no choice, just prayers and silence. But silence never saved anyone. Not my brother, not my cousin, not the women who never came back from the market, not the boys who were dragged from their classrooms at gunpoint, and definitely not me. I remember being 13 the first time I felt it. That dread, that deep, bone-level fear that something was about to go terribly wrong. I was walking home from school. The sun was low, turning the dirt road gold. I had a small book in my hand, one that our teacher had lent us about the history of Guatemala. I loved that book. I hugged it to my chest like it was sacred. And then I heard the footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, heavy. I didn't turn around. I just walked faster. But the footsteps matched my pace. That was the day I learned to run without thinking, without breathing, without screaming. I made it home, slammed the door. My mother scolded me for coming in like a storm, but I saw it in her eyes. She knew. We didn't talk about it, but she knew. A week later, a girl from the next village was found in the river. That was the moment I realized childhood had an expiration date, and mine had just ended. The soldiers were everywhere, not always in uniform, not always with guns. Sometimes they wore smiles, sometimes they helped carry your groceries, but the danger was always there, quiet, waiting. The men in my town changed. They grew meaner, angrier. They drank more, fought more, beat their wives in public, and no one intervened. My uncle once said, "It's the air. It's poisoned now." He wasn't wrong. At 16, I was working with my mother in the fields. We harvested what we could: maize, beans, squash. But the soil had stopped listening to us. The rain came too hard, or not at all. The earth was tired. We all were. That year I met a man. His name was Raphael. He was handsome in the way that made your stomach flutter and your mother frown. At first, he was kind, told me I deserved better, said he'd take me away from that place, make a life for us somewhere else. I was a girl with no future, and he was a man with promises. That was all it took. By the time I realized what he really was, I was already pregnant. He disappeared. No explanations. No goodbye. Just gone. I was 18, alone, terrified. I still remember the morning I woke up with blood on my legs and thought I'd lost the baby. I ran barefoot to the village nurse, crying, praying, making bargains with God. She gave me herbs, told me to rest, and said the baby was strong. "He wants to live," she whispered, placing my hand over my belly. "So you have to live too." That night, I decided to leave. There was no dramatic farewell. No family gathered at the gate. Just my mother, holding my hand in the dark, slipping a small rosary into my pocket and whispering, "Go, don't look back." And I didn't. I carried my belly through cities I'd never heard of, through forests that felt like they'd never end, through checkpoints and border towns and the kind of places where women disappear without a trace. I slept in shelters, in churches, under plastic tarps. I sold bracelets for food. I begged strangers for water. The farther north I went, the more I realized I wasn't the only one. There were others, women like me, men, children, all of us walking in a long, invisible line, hoping for something better. Some had been robbed, others had been raped. One girl I met in southern Mexico had lost her brother to the river crossing. "He couldn't swim," she said, her voice flat. "The water took him fast." We all had ghosts walking beside us. And yet, we kept going, because turning back wasn't an option. I made it to the U.S. border with nothing but a plastic bag of clothes and the name of a cousin I hadn't seen in years. My feet were blistered, my lips cracked, my skin peeling from sunburn. But I was alive, and so was he, my son, the little miracle still kicking inside me. I crossed at night through a part of the desert they called the Devil's Path. I saw bones in the sand. Real bones. A shoe here, a backpack there. Someone had left behind a baby bottle, half buried in the dust. I wondered if the child made it. I was 8 months pregnant, and the coyote said I moved too slow. "Leave her," someone whispered behind me. But he didn't. He let me rest under a rock when my legs gave out. Let me drink the last of his water when I couldn't swallow. Not all coyotes are monsters. Some are just men trying to survive like the rest of us. When we reached the other side, I collapsed. I thought that was the end. I thought I was safe. But crossing the border doesn't mean safety. It just means you've entered the next chapter of fear. The kind where you sleep with your shoes on in case ICE knocks on your door. Where you memorize your employer's address in case your son doesn't come home from school and you need to track him down before they take him. Where you learn which corners to avoid, which questions not to answer, and how to smile even when your whole body is screaming. I gave birth 2 weeks later on a mattress in a room that wasn't mine, surrounded by women I barely knew. They cheered when he cried. Samuel, that's what I named him. Because it sounded strong. Because it felt like hope. I held him against my chest, skin to skin, and promised him the world. I told him he would never feel what I felt. That I would protect him from the monsters, even the ones wearing uniforms, even if it meant never sleeping again. Even if it meant sacrificing my name, my dignity, my body. Even if it meant becoming a ghost in my own life, so he could fully live in his. I wonder now, did he ever feel that? That love? Did it ever reach him through the layers of rejection and shame? Or did it get lost in translation somewhere between our languages? If you've ever carried that kind of invisible weight, the kind only a mother can know, tell me below. Maybe just type, I carried more than they'll ever know. Because stories like ours deserve to be told. And maybe, Just maybe, someone out there needs to hear yours today. The first year in the United States felt like holding my breath underwater. I didn't know the language. I didn't know the laws. I didn't know who to trust. But I knew I had a baby to feed, and that was enough to make me keep going. It's strange, the things you can survive when you stop asking if it's fair and start asking what's next. Sleep became a luxury. Fear became routine. And my body, already stretched thin from the pregnancy and the journey, learned how to bend without breaking. My first job was cleaning hotel rooms. 10 rooms a day, sometimes 12. Stripping beds, scrubbing toilets, wiping mirrors that reflected someone I no longer recognized. The pay was low. The hours were long. But it was under the table. No questions asked, no papers needed. The manager was a tall man with tired eyes who never smiled. He called me Maria, even after I told him my name was Dolores. I stopped correcting him after the 3rd week. Samuel stayed with a woman named Carmen who watched kids in her living room. She charged less than the daycare centers and didn't ask for social security numbers. Her house smelled like beans and baby powder. Sometimes, when I picked Samuel up, he'd be asleep on a pile of mismatched cushions, his thumb in his mouth and his other hand clutching the corner of a blanket. I wanted to cry every time I saw him like that. He looked so small, so alone. But I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to. Instead, I kissed his forehead, wrapped him in my coat, and walked the 30 minutes back to our rented room, whispering, "One day, you'll thank me. One day, this will all make sense." The room we lived in was at the back of an old house split between 3 families. Our walls were thin. I could hear arguments through the vents, babies crying through the floorboards, footsteps above my head at all hours. The ceiling had water stains. The window didn't close all the way, but it had a lock on the door. And after everything I'd been through, that alone felt like a blessing. There were nights I skipped dinner so Samuel could have a full bottle. Days when I stretched a can of soup into 3 meals by adding rice and water. I hand-washed our clothes in the sink and dried them on the radiator. I memorized bus routes, learned which grocery stores didn't check IDs, found a clinic that saw undocumented patients, cash only. I carried around fear like a second heartbeat. Every knock on the door made me freeze. Every police siren sent adrenaline rushing through my chest. Every phone call from an unknown number made my palms sweat. I lived on alert, on edge, always scanning, always preparing. Because when you're undocumented, everything can be taken from you in a moment. Your job, your home, your child. You live in the cracks of society, doing the jobs nobody wants, working harder than anyone else, only to be called a burden by the same people who depend on your labor. I used to clean houses in rich neighborhoods, big homes with marble countertops and 4-car garages. The women there were always polite, always distant. They asked me to come through the back. They left checks on the kitchen counter. They called me sweetie and smiled like they were doing me a favor. I didn't mind. I wasn't there to be seen. I was there to work. I once cleaned a nursery for a newborn baby girl. The walls were painted soft pink, and there was a rocking chair by the window with a handmade quilt draped over it. I remember standing there, looking at the tiny crib, and feeling something crack inside me. Samuel had never had a crib. He had slept in a drawer for the first few weeks of his life. I lined it with blankets and told myself it was temporary. Everything was always temporary. I told myself that for years. Every time we moved, temporary. Every time I had to change jobs, temporary. Every time I said no to something I wanted, temporary. Because I believed that one day it would all be worth it. That Samuel would go to college. That he would never know the hunger I knew. That he would speak fluent English, wear clean clothes, live in a home where no one had to hide from ice or count coins to buy milk. And for a while, it looked like it was working. He was smart, curious. He picked up English faster than I could. He made friends at school. His teacher said he was gifted in math. I went to every parent-teacher conference, even if I didn't understand half of what they said. I smiled. I nodded. I clapped when they handed him awards. At night, I told him stories from Guatemala, about volcanoes and markets and how his grandmother once made 12 tamales with just 1 chicken and a lot of love. He used to listen. He used to laugh. But something changed when he turned 11. He started correcting my English. started asking me not to speak Spanish in front of his friends, started saying things like, "That's not how people do it here, Mom." And every time he said, "here," I felt a wall being built between us. One brick. Then another. Then another. I'd make his favorite food and he'd say, "Can we have pizza instead?" I'd ask about his day, and he'd shrug and say, "It was fine." He stopped kissing me goodnight, stopped holding my hand when we crossed the street, stopped calling me Mommy, and started calling me Mom, like he was trying to Americanize me too. I tried not to take it personally. Everyone said it was just adolescence. But deep down, I knew better. I knew what it was. Shame. The world had shown him what success looked like, and I wasn't part of that picture. I was the tired woman with a cleaning uniform, the one who didn't drive, the one who had an accent, the one who never went to college, the one who worked while other moms volunteered at school and brought cupcakes to class parties. He wanted to blend in, and I was the thing that made him stand out. And still, I worked harder. I picked up a weekend job at a laundromat, folded other people's clothes for 10 hours while my son sat at home with a microwave dinner and a phone. I told myself it was for him, always for him. But sometimes I wondered, what if it wasn't enough? What if everything I was sacrificing was building a future that didn't include me? Tell me, have you ever loved someone so much that you erased parts of yourself just to give them more space to grow? Leave a comment, even just a few words. Maybe, I gave everything so they could belong. Because somewhere out there, another parent is wondering if they're the only one, and your words might be the answer they need. It didn't happen all at once, the rejection. It crept in slowly, like a fog rolling under the door while you're still asleep. At first, it was harmless, or at least I told myself it was. A shrug here, a cold answer there, a glance that lingered too long on my shoes, my accent, my hair pulled back the way my mother used to do it. I didn't see the danger in those little things. I thought it was just him growing up. I thought it was normal, but I was wrong. It started with language. It always does. "Why do you say it like that?" he asked once after I mispronounced a word in English while helping him with homework. I smiled, trying to laugh it off. "Because I didn't learn English until I came here, mi amor." He didn't smile back. "Well, maybe you should learn better. People make fun of us." That word, us, used to mean him and me, mother and son, a team. But suddenly, it meant something else. It meant him and a version of me he wished he had. He was embarrassed. Of me. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, as if that somehow made the words hurt less. As if a mother could ever be truly prepared to see her own child flinch when she speaks. The next week, we were at the grocery store. I was asking the cashier something in English, struggling with the phrasing, and he cut me off. "I'll do it," he said sharply, stepping in front of me. "Just go wait outside." He was 12. I walked outside holding a bag of rice and 2 tomatoes, and I waited. I stood by the door like a stranger, like someone he'd just met on the street. After that, I started staying quiet more often. I let him talk for us. I let him order at restaurants, speak to the bus drivers, call the school when he missed the bus. I told myself it was good practice for him, that it was helping him grow. But really, I was shrinking. He didn't call me Mommy anymore, just Mom. And even that started to sound like an obligation, like a title he wasn't proud of. He began asking questions I didn't know how to answer. "Why don't you have papers? Why can't you just get a green card? Why didn't you come here the right way?" I tried to explain how hard it is, how expensive, how the system isn't built for people like us, how I ran because staying meant dying. But he didn't want explanations. He wanted to be like everyone else. And I was the reason he wasn't. He started spending more time online, watching videos, reading posts, absorbing ideas I didn't recognize. I caught him once scrolling through a video that called immigrants leeches and criminals. I took the phone from his hands and snapped, "Why are you watching this?" He rolled his eyes. "Because it's not all lies, you know. Maybe if people didn't come here illegally, things would be better." I felt like the floor opened beneath me. "Do you think I wanted to come here illegally?" I whispered. He didn't answer. I don't even think he looked at me. Later that night, I found him on a video call with his friend. He was laughing, telling a story about how I didn't know how to pronounce beach and how I'd accidentally said something inappropriate. They were both in tears from laughing. "Sometimes I wish I had a normal mom," he said. That one hit me in the stomach so hard I had to sit down. Not a poor mom, not a sick mom, not even a mean mom. A normal mom. Someone who fit in. Someone who spoke English without an accent. Someone who didn't need him to translate, to explain, to cover up. And slowly it became a pattern. His friends stopped coming over. He asked me not to talk when they did. "Just stay in your room, okay?" he'd say, avoiding my eyes. I tried to dress differently. I bought a second-hand jacket that looked more American. I stopped making tortillas in the evenings when his friends were around because he said the smell stuck to his clothes. I started putting more effort into speaking English, even though every word felt like a tongue twist in my mouth. I became a stranger in my own home. He was ashamed of where he came from, and I was the reminder. And yet I still loved him more than anything in the world. I still made his favorite food when he was sad. Still stayed up to make sure he got home safe. Still kissed his forehead while he slept, even if he no longer reached for my hand. There was one night I'll never forget. He came home late from a friend's house. He'd been out celebrating someone's birthday. I was waiting, as always, sitting on the couch, the TV on mute. When he walked in, I smiled. "Did you have fun?" He looked at me, really looked, and said, "You don't have to wait up anymore. It's not like I'm a kid." I nodded. Then he added, "You're the reason I don't feel normal. Maybe if I lived with someone else, I wouldn't have to pretend all the time." I didn't reply. I went to bed and cried into my pillow like I used to when I first got here, back when I didn't speak a word of English, and cried from loneliness, from fear, from hunger. But this time, I cried because the boy I gave my life to was slipping away, and I couldn't hold on. I started questioning everything. Had I made the wrong decision? Should I have stayed in Guatemala, even with the danger? Had I stolen his chance at a normal life by trying to give him a better one? I went to work the next morning like nothing had happened. Scrubbed toilets, washed windows, smiled at the families that welcomed me in and ignored me in the same breath. But inside, I was unraveling. I couldn't say anything to anyone. Who would understand? Other immigrant mothers would. I know that now. But back then, I didn't have anyone to talk to. No support group, no therapist, no hotline, just silence. And it's in that silence that I started to disappear from his life, not physically, but emotionally. He stopped asking for my help, stopped sharing stories, stopped laughing. He became someone I didn't recognize, and I became someone he didn't want to recognize. Have you ever had someone you love slowly pull away from you? Not because you hurt them, but because of who you are, because of your roots, your history, your accent, your presence? If you felt that pain, that quiet, invisible rejection, leave a comment below. Maybe just write, "I became invisible to the person I love most." You never know. Someone might read your words and feel less alone tonight. The moment it all cracked open wasn't loud. It wasn't some dramatic fight or slammed door. It was just a Tuesday, a regular day. I had made dinner, sopa de pollo, because he'd been coughing the night before. It was warm. It smelled like comfort, like home. I placed the bowl in front of him and said gently, "Eat before it gets cold." He didn't look up. He just stared at his phone. I sat across from him. The silence was thick, filled with all the things we hadn't said for weeks, maybe months. I watched him push the soup around with his spoon, not even tasting it. Then he said it, low, calm, like he was commenting on the weather. "If she gets deported, we can finally live in peace." I didn't realize he was on the phone. He had his earbuds in. He thought I couldn't hear him, but I heard it. Every syllable carved a line across my heart. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I had stepped outside my body, like I was floating just above the kitchen table, watching a version of myself break in slow motion. I didn't confront him. Not right away. I couldn't. I wasn't strong enough to ask him what he meant, or worse, to hear it from his own mouth again. So I waited. I went into the bathroom and locked the door, and I sank to the floor like a dropped coat. I didn't even cry at first. I just sat there, letting the silence fill me like water. Had it really come to this? After everything? After desserts and borders and nights on the cold floor of shelters with my arms wrapped around him to keep the fear out? After years of missing birthdays so I could work double shifts? of going without new shoes so he could have what the other kids had. I wasn't the enemy, but in his eyes, I had become the problem. Later that night, I stood in the doorway of his room. He was asleep, one arm tossed over his face, the same way he used to sleep as a little boy. I looked at him, searching for the child I used to know, the one who clung to me when he was scared, who whispered "te quiero" into my ear before school. I couldn't find him. Or maybe I just couldn't find myself in him anymore. I sat in the living room until morning. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every word he'd said haunted me like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Live in peace. As if my presence had been the storm all along. That weekend, we argued for the first time in a long time. Not the small kind of fight, not about chores or curfews or homework. This was different, deeper. I asked him where he'd been all night. He said it didn't matter. I told him I worried. He rolled his eyes and said, "You always worry about the wrong things." "What does that mean?" I asked. He didn't even hesitate. "It means you care more about hiding from immigration than you care about actually living. You've been paranoid my whole life. I'm tired of it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Paranoid? Was that what he thought all of this was? He didn't understand. He couldn't. How could he know what it's like to be one siren away from losing everything? To wake up each day, wondering if it would be the day they finally come for you? I raised my voice, my words spilling in Spanish because English was too soft for my pain. "Tú no sabes lo que he sacrificado para que estés aquí." He answered me in English. Yeah, well, maybe I didn't ask for any of it. That's when it happened. That moment you realize the person you love has already walked away, not physically but emotionally. His words hit me harder than any slap ever could. Not because they were loud, but because they were true, at least to him. He hadn't asked for this life. He hadn't asked to be born to a woman who crossed borders and lived in shadows. He wanted freedom, simplicity, a life without explanations. And in his mind, that life couldn't include me. I left the house. I walked for hours. Past the laundromat where I used to work, past the church that let me sleep in their basement my first winter, past the bus stop where I used to hold him on my lap, his cheeks red from the cold, his little hands in mine. I remembered the way he used to look at me then, like I was the center of his world, his anchor, his safety. When had that changed? Had I missed it? Or had I just refused to see it? I ended up at the park, the same one where I used to take him when he was little. I sat on the bench where we once shared ice cream, and I cried for the first time in years. Not quiet tears, not the kind you wipe away. I cried with my whole body, with my hands, with my shoulders, with the ache of a woman who gave up her country, her name, her sense of self, all for a love that no longer knew how to recognize her. When I came back home, the house was dark. He was in his room, headphones in, door closed. I stood there for a long time, thinking about what to say, about whether to say anything at all. I decided to wait. Again. But something had shifted. The next morning, I found my immigration papers, the ones I kept hidden, had been moved. Someone had looked at them. Had he? Was he planning something? My heart sank. That afternoon, I got a call from the school counselor. She asked if I was available to come in. "There's something I'd like to discuss with you and Samuel," she said, her voice careful, polite. I went. I sat in a room with beige walls and a tissue box in the middle of the table. The counselor looked at me kindly, too kindly. She told me that Samuel had been talking a lot about wanting to escape, about feeling trapped. She said he'd mentioned immigration, deportation. She asked if everything was okay at home. I didn't know how to answer. What was I supposed to say? That I loved a boy who didn't love me back the same way anymore? That I feared my own child might be the one to call the people I ran from? I left the meeting with shaking hands. Something was coming. I could feel it. That week, the mailbox held a letter I couldn't read at first. It was from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. My name, a date, a hearing. Someone had tipped them off, and I didn't need to ask who. My body already knew. The pain was too familiar, too close, too intimate. It wasn't the government that wanted me gone. It was the boy I had raised to survive without me. Have you ever felt like a stranger in your own family? Like the people you love most are the ones holding the knife, Not with rage, but with silence? If you have, I need you to share something. Anything. Write in the comments. The betrayal came from inside, because maybe someone else is reading this, sitting in their own silence, wondering if they're the only one, and they need your words tonight. I stared at the letter for a long time. It felt heavier than paper should feel. My hands trembled, not because I hadn't expected it, but because some part of me still believed I was invisible, that if I worked hard enough, kept my head down, stayed out of trouble, the world would forget I existed, and that was supposed to keep me safe. But the world hadn't forgotten. They never forget us. They just wait, watching, quietly, until someone hands them what they need. The envelope had my name, but the betrayal had his fingerprints. I didn't confront him that day. I wanted to. I wanted to storm into his room, hold the paper in his face, scream, "Why?" But the truth is, I already knew why. And the other truth? I wasn't ready to hear it come out of his mouth. Instead, I went into the kitchen and made coffee. Black. No sugar. My hands moved on their own. Muscle memory. Pour, stir, sip. As if that routine could ground me in something familiar. Something solid. But nothing felt solid anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise outside became a threat. Every car that slowed down near the house. Every door that shut in the distance. My heart leapt. I slept in my clothes, kept a small bag packed under the bed, just in case. Just like I did when Samuel was a baby and ice vans used to circle the neighborhood like wolves. Only this time, I wasn't just hiding from them. I was hiding from him. In the days that followed, he didn't act any different. He still came home late, still ate quietly, still avoided looking me in the eye. But there was something in the way he moved, something colder. He kept his door locked now. His phone screen always tilted away, his backpack clutched tighter. I started replaying every conversation, every silence, every moment that might have pointed to this. Had he done it out of anger? Out of shame? Or, and this is the one that hurt most, had he done it out of indifference? Like it was no longer a question of right or wrong, but just convenience. I kept imagining the call. Was it a form online? A hotline? Did he sit there in his room, my voice humming in the kitchen, and type out my name like it meant nothing? Did he click submit while I was folding his laundry? Did he know what that meant? Did he know what deportation really looks like? Handcuffs? Cages? Buses filled with crying women? Did he know they don't let you say goodbye? Or maybe he didn't care. Maybe he thought he'd be fine. Free. American. Normal. That word again. Normal. It haunted me. I wasn't normal. I was an immigrant, a mother, a cleaner, a woman who crossed a desert with a baby in her belly and faith in her bones. And now, I was a problem to be solved, a barrier to be removed, a line on a report someone wanted to erase. At work, I started noticing things too. The houses I cleaned felt different. One of the women, Mrs. Taylor, asked if I was going to be okay, with everything going on. She smiled too politely. Her tone carried pity and fear, like she was trying to say goodbye without saying it. Another client rescheduled and never called back. People can smell uncertainty, and they run from it. I couldn't blame them. I wouldn't want to watch someone unravel either. At night, I began planning for the worst. I made copies of important documents. I wrote down the numbers of relatives back in Guatemala, even though I hadn't spoken to most of them in years. I made a list of shelters, detention center locations, lawyers. I packed a small bag with essentials, soap, socks, 2 photos of Samuel as a baby. I wrote him a letter. I didn't know if I'd ever get to give it to him, but I needed the words to live somewhere outside my chest. In it, I told him I loved him, that I always would, that no matter what he believed, I didn't regret the life I gave up to bring him here, that he came from strength, from survival. From women who buried children and kept going, who sewed life into scraps of fabric, who held families together with their bare hands. He came from me, and even if he couldn't see it now, I hoped one day he would. When the day of the hearing arrived, I didn't wake him. I let him sleep. I sat at the edge of my bed watching the sunlight creep across the floor like it always did. Warm, quiet, unbothered by human grief. I dressed slowly. No makeup, just clean clothes. Simple, respectful. I held the letter in my coat pocket. I didn't know if I'd come back. At the courthouse, the hallways were filled with faces like mine, tired, anxious, praying with their eyes. The air smelled like sweat and old fear. I waited. They called my name. My hands were cold. Inside the room, it was just a table, a judge, a translator, a clock ticking too loudly. They asked questions, so many questions, dates, locations, my son's name. I answered with the truth, all of it. I told them I ran from violence, that I came pregnant, that I built a life from nothing, that I raised a boy who now belonged to this country more than I ever could. They listened, they nodded, but they didn't smile. No one ever smiles in those rooms. When it was over, I was told to wait for a decision. Weeks, maybe months, and I walked out of that building with the same weight I carried in. Except now, I knew one thing with certainty. Someone had put me there. Not because of what I'd done, but because of who I was. And he didn't want to live in my shadow anymore. If you've ever faced the cold edge of rejection from someone you built your life around, if you've ever been made to feel disposable by the very person you protected, comment something, even if it's just, they forgot who saved them. Because some truths are too heavy to carry alone, and your voice, your pain, might be the light someone else is searching for. The walk back home after the court hearing felt longer than it had ever been. Not because the streets had changed, they hadn't, but because I had. It felt like I was carrying centuries on my back. Not just years of motherhood, or miles of migration, or the weight of undocumented fear, but something deeper, ancestral. Like every woman who had ever been forced to leave her child behind was now walking beside me, silent, mourning, understanding. I kept thinking about him, about Samuel, what he was doing while I stood in front of that judge. Was he playing video games? Was he with friends? Did he know what that letter meant? Did he even care? The sun was setting when I reached our block. The air smelled like fried food and car exhaust. Kids were playing soccer with a deflated ball. Someone was blasting music from their car, a reggaeton beat I used to dance to in another life when my hips moved freely, when laughter didn't feel like betrayal. I stood in front of the house for a while, watching the window of his room. The curtain was drawn. I imagined him inside, scrolling, clicking, existing in a world I no longer had access to. The divide between us now wasn't just generational. It was spiritual. Like we had become different species, one molded by survival, the other by assimilation. When I walked in, the TV was on. He didn't look up. I didn't speak. I couldn't. What could I possibly say? That I stood in court defending my right to stay in the only country he's ever called home? That I had to beg strangers not to send me away? That I held my breath every time the judge paused, waiting for the sentence that might erase my existence here? He wouldn't understand. Or maybe worse, he would, and he wouldn't care. Later that night, I found the trash bin in the kitchen overflowing. Empty soda cans, fast food wrappers, a crumpled page from a school form I'd asked him to fill out. The mess was a mirror, loud, chaotic, disrespectful. I cleaned it silently, one piece at a time, while he laughed at something in his room. And with every wrapper I picked up, a piece of me unraveled. I started to wonder, if I disappeared, would he even notice? Or would he just breathe easier? Would he say to someone else, she was never really part of my life anyway? Would he celebrate the quiet? I kept playing the phrase over and over in my head. If she gets deported, we can finally live in peace. Like my existence was the disruption. Like I was the storm, and my removal would restore calm. That sentence had become a ghost, haunting every room, every chore, every step I took inside that house. At work, I moved slower. My mind wandered. A woman I cleaned for asked if I was okay. I smiled, said yes. That's what we do. We lie with our faces, because telling the truth feels like exposing an open wound to the wind. I was drowning in doubt. Everything I had believed about sacrifice, about love, about the power of a mother's devotion, it all felt cracked, shaky. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe love didn't win in the end. Maybe love just wasn't enough. The letter from the court said the outcome would arrive by mail. I checked the mailbox every day, holding my breath. expecting it to come with a deadline, with instructions, with the cold stamp of rejection. And every day that it didn't come, I felt both relief and dread, because waiting is its own kind of punishment. You're not free. You're not condemned. You just exist in limbo, suspended between two fates, unable to plan anything. Do you pack? Do you fight? Do you beg? You just wait. I started having nightmares again, of borders, of cages, of losing Samuel. Only now, the dreams weren't about us being separated by force. They were about him standing on the other side of a locked gate and walking away on purpose. The worst part was waking up and realizing it didn't feel like a dream. It felt like foreshadowing. One afternoon, I came home early from work. My boss had let me go after a short shift. "The family's out of town," she said. Her voice was always overly sweet, like sugar trying to cover poison. I walked into the house and found the living room empty, quiet. I put my keys down, took off my shoes, and then I heard it. His voice, from his room, laughing, talking to someone. I stood by his door, not to eavesdrop, but because my legs couldn't move. "I just want to be done with her," he said. Done. Like I was a task, a project, a burden. The person on the other end said something I couldn't hear. Then Samuel replied, "It's not like she's ever really been here for me anyway. All she does is worry about immigration. It's like her whole identity is being afraid." My throat burned. That was all he saw? Not the woman who walked across countries to hold his hand? Not the one who fed him when she didn't eat? Not the one who folded his dreams into her prayers, night after night? Just fear? I walked away before he could say more. I went into the bathroom, closed the door, and stared at my reflection. My eyes were puffy, my skin tired. There was a line forming between my brows, a worry wrinkle, etched over years of stress. Was this what survival looked like? Was this the face of a woman who gave everything? Would he ever see it? That night, I didn't make dinner. I didn't remind him about his homework. I didn't ask how his day was. I just sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. He passed me in the hallway and paused. "Aren't you gonna cook?" I didn't answer. He scoffed. "Okay, whatever." He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask where I'd been. He didn't even look twice. And that's when it hit me. It wasn't just that he was ashamed of me. It wasn't just that he didn't understand me. He didn't see me at all anymore. I had become invisible, the background noise of his life, a ghost who paid the bills, did the laundry, kept the lights on, and could disappear tomorrow without disrupting his world. That kind of pain is unspeakable. It doesn't scream. It whispers, and it stays with you long after the words are gone. If you've ever sat across from someone you love, knowing they've already erased you from their story, I want you to share that here. Type something like, "I was still breathing, but they stopped seeing me." Your comment might be the mirror someone else needs to realize they're not the only ghost in the room. The day the letter finally arrived, it didn't make a sound. It didn't come with a warning, just a quiet shuffle in the mailbox. Paper among paper. Nothing about it screamed that it was the moment everything would change. That's the cruel part about life. The biggest shifts don't always come with thunder. Sometimes they arrive on Tuesdays, folded neatly between advertisements. I held the envelope in my hands for several minutes before I opened it. The edges were slightly damp from my palms. My breath was uneven. My mind raced. I had imagined this moment over and over again, every version of it. Acceptance, rejection, a second chance, a final notice. But nothing prepares you for reality. When I tore it open, my eyes didn't know where to land. There were too many words, too many official stamps, too many legal phrases built to suffocate someone like me. Then I found it. The decision. Removal proceedings initiated. No relief granted. There it was. Cold. Indifferent. Absolute. It felt like someone had taken a knife and sliced through my identity in a single stroke. Years of living, hiding, sacrificing, reduced to a line on a government-issued paper. I was being erased. I sank to the floor. The tiles were cold against my skin, grounding me in their cruelty. My chest felt tight, not just from fear, from grief. This wasn't just about me. This was about everything I had built, everything I had dreamed, everything I had tried to become. I thought of Samuel. of his face when he was a baby, mouth wide open in laughter, hands always reaching for mine. Of the nights I slept sitting up just to keep him warm, of the lullabies I hummed when I didn't have the words to soothe his cries, of how he used to call me his hero. And now, what was I to him? An inconvenience? An embarrassment? A problem he had finally solved? He wasn't home when I opened the letter. Part of me was glad. I needed to break in private. I needed to sob without shame, to fall apart without his silent judgment watching me from across the room. I sat there until the light shifted, until the room grew darker and the shadows grew longer. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I barely breathed. When he came home, I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. For once, he noticed something in my face. "What happened?" he asked, his voice uncertain. I wanted to scream, to ask him how he could even ask me that, to shake the letter in his face and say, This is what you wanted, right? This is what peace looks like to you?" But I didn't. Instead, I held up the envelope. He didn't take it. He just stared at it. And then he did something that surprised me. He sat down, not across from me, next to me. We didn't talk for a while. The silence between us wasn't angry this time. It was scared, unsure, like we were both waiting for the other to speak first, both too proud and too broken to reach out. Finally, I said, "They're sending me back." He blinked. His throat bobbed, but he said nothing. I whispered, "Is that what you wanted?" He opened his mouth, closed it. I tried again. "Did you tell them?" His body stiffened. His eyes dropped to the floor. That was my answer. He didn't need to say it. I felt it in the way the silence wrapped around us like chains, in the way guilt hung in the air, heavier than any confession. My heart cracked, not in half, but in layers, because I didn't just lose a case. I lost my child, the version of him I raised. The boy who used to chase butterflies in the park. The boy who drew me crayon pictures that said, "I love you with too many hearts." That boy was gone. And the young man sitting beside me, quiet, ashamed, unfamiliar, he wasn't mine anymore. I stood up, not out of anger, but out of something worse, surrender. I walked to my room, closed the door, and started packing. Slowly, deliberately, not because I accepted it, but because I had no choice. What was I going to do? Fight a system built to swallow people like me? Try to explain to a courtroom that love should matter more than paperwork? That survival should be a valid reason for presence? I folded my clothes neatly. I chose what to take with care. A photo of my mother, my worn Bible, the bracelet Samuel made me in 2nd grade from string and plastic beads. It spelled Imam in faded letters. I clutched it to my chest. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a eulogy. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the edge of my bed, waiting for the morning. My heart was numb, my eyes dry. Sometimes the body knows when grief has reached its limit. It shuts down. At dawn, I opened the door. He was standing there, still in his clothes from the night before, his face pale, his eyes red. He looked at me and asked, "Can I come with you?" And that was the moment everything shattered again. Not from pain, but from confusion. I didn't know if I was supposed to be relieved, angry, heartbroken, or grateful. I asked, "Why?" He said, "Because I don't want you to go alone." And I wanted to believe him. I really did. But it was too late for pretty words. Too late for last-minute guilt. Still, I didn't stop him from following me into the living room. He sat while I continued packing. At one point, he reached for the envelope. I let him read it. He didn't speak. Then, finally, he whispered, "I didn't know it would happen like this." I turned to him. "You thought I'd just disappear?" He shook his head. I thought, I don't know, I was angry. I felt trapped, like I was always having to explain you. And I didn't want to do that anymore. His honesty cut like glass, but I appreciated it, because for once, he was telling me the truth. I nodded. "Now you don't have to." He lowered his head into his hands, and for the first time in years, I saw him cry. Not out of childish frustration, not out of teenage drama, but out of regret, real, gut-deep regret. He kept repeating, I'm sorry, but some apologies come too late to undo the damage. They aren't Band-Aids, they're tombstones. If you've ever had someone apologize only after the wreckage is already done, if you've ever stood in front of the ruins of a relationship built with your own hands, I want you to tell your story, even if it's just one line. Write in the comments, "Their sorry came after the silence," because you never know who else is holding back their pain, thinking they're the only ones still bleeding. He cried for a long time, the kind of crying that comes from a place deeper than guilt, from realization, from finally seeing the shape of what you broke. But as much as I had longed to hear him say those words, "I'm sorry," something inside me stayed quiet, hollow, because the apology had come too late, not because time had passed, but because something irreversible had happened in the silence between us. Trust had eroded, not with violence, not with shouting, but with the soft decay of distance, the unspoken resentments, the mornings he didn't say goodbye, the nights he shut his door like I was a stranger outside. Still, I listened, because that's what mothers do, even when the child is no longer a child, even when the love is bruised and the heart feels like paper left out in the rain. I sat down beside him again, in the same spot where I'd held the deportation letter just hours earlier. The air between us felt strange, thick with what wasn't said. He wiped his eyes. "I don't know who I am without you," he whispered. And that was the truth he had been carrying. Beneath the pride, beneath the rejection, beneath all the moments he'd tried to erase me from his world, he was afraid, not of me, but of being without me. I wanted to hold him, to cradle his face and tell him it would all be okay. But something held me back. Maybe I didn't believe it myself. So instead I said, "You'll figure it out." He looked at me, searching my face for the warmth he remembered. I gave him what I could. "I didn't come here to make you feel trapped," I said slowly. "I came here to give you wings. But I used them to fly away from you," he said, tears threatening again. "No," I said. "You used them to become who you thought you had to be." He shook his head, eyes wide with regret. "But I don't like who I became." Silence again. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small photo. It was old, frayed around the edges. The two of us, covered in dust from our first shelter after crossing. He was just a toddler then, face pressed against my chest, eyes wide and tired. I held him like the world might break if I let go. I handed him the photo. "I used to show this to people," I said softly. "Whenever someone asked why I worked so much, why I kept my head down, why I didn't go out, didn't rest, I'd show them this and say, 'This is why.'" He looked at the photo for a long time. His fingers touched the corner gently, as if he could step into the image and undo the time between then and now. "I was happy," he whispered. "I just forgot." "No," I corrected him. "You were ashamed, and you let that shame grow louder than your love." His lips trembled, and I saw it. That moment when a person realizes what they've lost, not just me, but something in themselves. "I can fix it," he said. "I'll fight. I'll get a lawyer. I'll write letters. I'll do anything." I wanted to stop him, to tell him that some things can't be fixed with desperation, that some systems are built not to bend, but to break us. But I let him speak, let him dream, because maybe he needed that hope. For years, I had carried the burden for both of us, the fear, the planning, the silence. And now, finally, he wanted to carry something too. I nodded. "Okay," because that was the only thing I could give him now, the chance to try. The next few days were strange. He stayed home more, sat in the kitchen with me while I cooked, asked questions about my life before, about the crossing, about how I survived. He listened without interrupting, like he was hearing my story for the first time, like he finally saw me as more than just his mother. He helped with dishes. He walked me to the bus stop. He brought home flowers from the corner store one night, small, wilted daisies, but I had never seen anything more beautiful. We were learning each other again, not mother and child, but woman and man. Two people stitched together by pain and trying to find the thread again. At one point, he asked if I hated him. I told him the truth. "I hated what you did, but I never hated you." He cried again, not loudly this time, just quiet tears, falling like apologies he didn't know how to say. Still, the reality loomed. The The court's decision stood. I was ordered to leave. It was only a matter of when. He searched online, called numbers, wrote emails, even went to speak with a counselor at school, asking if there were organizations that helped immigrants. He came home with pamphlets, phone numbers, contacts. He was fighting, and I let him, because maybe that was the healing he needed, to undo what he could, to learn that love isn't just a feeling, it's action, effort, showing up even after you've let someone down. But I also prepared, silently, carefully, because I knew what the system was, and I had seen it crush women who had fought harder than me, women who had more money, more lawyers, more time. I wrote a letter, not for the judge, for him. I tucked it inside his drawer when he wasn't looking, in case I was taken without warning, in case the knock came in the middle of the night, in case he woke up one day and I was simply gone. The letter was short. I told him I forgave him, that love doesn't die from silence, that I had always been proud of him, even when he wasn't proud of me, that he came from warriors, and that even in my absence, my blood was still his foundation, that no matter where I ended up, this country or another, I would still carry his name in my prayers. I ended it with the words my mother once whispered to me before I left her behind. Tu camino es tuyo, pero mi corazón siempre va contigo. Your path is yours, but my heart walks with you. Have you ever prepared for a goodbye you didn't want to say because you had no choice? If you've had to pack memories in silence, write something in the comments below. Maybe just, I prepared to disappear so they could keep living. Because some of us carry goodbyes in our pockets long before we say them out loud. And maybe your words will hold someone else up tonight. I didn't know what morning it would be. That's the hardest part. You live with the ache of uncertainty, the way someone lives with a suitcase half-packed in the corner of the room. It becomes a part of the scenery. You cook, you clean, you laugh when you can, and all the while, some part of you is already halfway gone. It didn't come with sirens or shouting, just a knock, 3 sharp taps, early, before the sun had fully stretched across the windows. I froze. Samuel was still asleep. They asked for me. I didn't cry. I didn't fight. I looked at him one last time, his chest rising and falling beneath the blanket, his arm thrown across the pillow like when he was 5, and I whispered, "You are enough." Because he was, even with everything that happened, even after all the silence, the pain, the distance. He was enough, and I needed him to carry that forward, not the guilt, not the shame, just the knowing that he came from love. They let me grab a few things. The bag was already packed. I didn't have to say much. The letter was on the counter. I left the door open behind me, even though I wanted to lock it like I always did. Some goodbyes aren't loud. They're quiet, like exhaling, like letting go of a story you held for too long. The van was cold, the windows fogged. I couldn't see much as we pulled away. Just shapes, light, the familiar blur of a city I once called mine. No one waved. No one screamed. It was just me, my memories, and a future still unwritten. What happened after that maybe isn't what you expect, because this isn't a story about revenge. It's not even a story about justice. It's a story about transformation, about what happens when the heart breaks wide open and somehow still keeps beating. Samuel found the letter. He read it. He told me later that he sat on the kitchen floor for hours after that he called every number again, that he cried in the shower until the water turned cold, that he finally understood what it means to lose someone while they're still alive. He didn't stop fighting, and neither did I. There are things I cannot say here. Names, locations, too many details. But what I can say is this: I was not deported. Not that week. Not yet. A community group took my case. A woman I had once cleaned for wrote a letter of support, Samuel testified. He stood in front of a room of strangers and said, through tears, "I made a mistake, but please don't make it permanent." And for once, someone listened. We're still in limbo, still waiting, but we're waiting together now, and that changes everything. He calls me mommy again. He asks about my childhood, about the river I crossed, about the smells of the kitchen I left behind. We're rebuilding, not from scratch, but from truth. There are scars. Of course there are. But scars mean healing. Scars mean survival. I share this story not because it's unique, but because it's far too common. Because too many mothers like me have no voice. Too many children like him grow up ashamed of the very hands that carried them across continents. Because shame can poison love. But storytelling can heal it. If you've made it to the end of this video, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening, for holding space for pain that often lives in silence. If you know someone who's ever felt invisible, abandoned, or like they had to earn their right to be loved, share this story with them. And if you see yourself in this story, whether you're the parent, the child, or both, I hope you know this. It's never too late to come home. Even if the home is just a conversation. Even if the home is just forgiveness. Even if the home is a memory you're learning to love again. Before you go, I'd love to hear your voice in the comments. Write something like, I carried my family even when they let go of me. Or whatever words your heart needs today. Your story, your truth, it matters more than you think. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your moment. Here, we don't just share stories, we honor them. We remember the voices that were silenced. We shine a light on the mothers, the fighters, the forgotten. So hit that subscribe button if you believe these stories deserve to be told. And now, click the next video that just appeared on your screen, because there's another life waiting to be heard. Another soul waiting to be seen. And maybe, just maybe, it's yours.